I'm Tammy Colda, an applied mathematician, and this is Unlocking LaTeX Graphics. On this channel, I present tutorials on using TXE and pgfplots. The videos on this channel are based on my book, Unlocking LaTeX Graphics, as well as some bonus materials. Today, I'm going to show you how to add numbers on top of the bars in bar plots made with pgfplots. I have an earlier episode on the basics of bar plots, which I'll link in the show notes. In this video, I'll cover how to set up a basic bar plot, how to add numbers using the nodes near Coords option, how to style those numbers, how to compute custom values like percentages using the key visualization depends on, and how to do multibar plots of multiple data series with numbers on top. Before we get started, let's set up our document. I'm using a parskip package to avoid paragraph indentation and hyperref to link the author name back to the YouTube channel. The key package is pgfplots. Whenever you use pgfplots, you have to set the compatibility, which here I'm setting to version 1.18. I'm also setting some default axis options, including scale-only axis and a fixed width and height. Now we're ready to create some bar plot. Let me show you the data files we'll use. I have two files, one for 2024 sales and one for 2023 sales. Each file has 3 columns, quarter, sales, and target. I have an earlier episode on working with data files that I'll link in the show notes. This is a simple ybar plot showing quarterly sales data from our sales 2024.txt data file. The ybar in the axis options is what causes this to be a bar plot. Then I specify the bar width to be 20 pt, making it a little wider than the default. I'm setting ymin equals 0 to ensure that the y-axis starts at 0, which is recommended for visualization of bar plots. The symbolic x Coords is a special command that maps the names Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 implicitly to the x-axis in that order. You can think of this as mapping these values to 1, 2, 3, 4 behind the scenes. I talked about this in my earlier episode on bar plots as well, so you might also go and review that. The xtick equal data option tells pgfplots to put the tick marks at each of the symbolic coordinates that appear in the data file. The y label and title options add labels to the y-axis and the plot title, respectively. Before we add numbers on top of the bars, let's do some adjustments to improve the look of the plot. The first thing I want to change is that the bars are a bit squished, pushing right up against the sides. I'm going to add the command enlarge x limits equals 0.2 to give some padding on either side of the bars. The default is 0.1. Especially when working with symbolic x coordinates, this is better, I think, than using xmin and xmax because I have no idea what x values these have actually been mapped to. I could play around and try and figure it out, but I don't have to worry about it if I just use enlarge x limits. Next, let's add some grid lines to make it easier to read the values. I set y major grids to true to add horizontal grid lines at the major tick marks. If I zoom in, you can see that there are both tick marks and grid lines. The tick marks are redundant when we already have these grid lines and make things look a little bit funny. I can remove the tick marks by setting ytick style to draw equals none. And now when I recompile, those funny lines are gone. I can also add minor grid lines between the major ones. I set minor ytick num to 1 to add 1 minor tick between each major tick, and y minor grids to true to draw lines at those minor ticks. So when I compile that, we get our lines at the minor tick lines as well. And because I've already set ytick style to draw equals none, it's not drawing either major or minor tick marks, just the grid lines. The y-axis labels are automatically scaled to be in units of 10,000. You can see this little multiplier on top of the y-axis here. It would arguably be better to show them in the thousands. You also think of units of sales being in the thousands. So I'm going to use the scaled y-ticks option to change that. So I'm setting scaled y-ticks equals base 10 colon minus 3 to divide all the tick labels by 10 to the third. So I'm basically scaling them by 10 to the minus 3. And so now our unit sales are in the thousands rather than in the 10,000s. I dislike the tick marks on the x-axis for bar charts. So since we're already not drawing the y tick marks, I could just set the major tick length to 0 pt, and now we'll remove them for both the x and y tick marks. And now they're gone. Now for the main topic of this video, adding numbers on top of the bars. To do this, I just paste the nodes near Coords option into my axis options, and this prints the y value above each bar. This is the simplest way to add numbers to your bar plot. And then we're just going to go through a bunch of ways to specialize that. The numbers here are a bit hard to read against the grid lines. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a white background by adding a style for these nodes near Coords. So the way I do that is nodes near Coords style equals fill equals white. Now this actually appends the underlying style that's used on these nodes. And so now I don't have lines going through the middle of the nodes. It makes them a little bit easier to read. There's one more issue, which is that this top number is a little close to that bar. So let's give ourselves a little more space by setting y max equals 80,000. And then that just leaves a little more space above that tallest bar. These numbers are quite long. Let's round them to the nearest thousandth before we put them onto that label. Here's where things get a little more advanced. First, I have to use this special option, visualization depends on, to compute a new value that I will later use for what nodes near Coords will display. My calculation is using the pgfmath library. It rounds the result of dividing the entry in the sales column by 1,000 to the nearest integer. The result is stored in a variable called myValue. Then I use nodes near Coords with an argument that specifies what is displayed and references the myValue macro, followed by the letter K to indicate that we're talking about 1,000. So when I compile that, you see that we get now 45K, 62K, and so on top of our bars, making it a little easier to read. Here's where things get really interesting. We can show computed values that aren't even in the data. Our data file has a target column, so that's the target number of sales. Let's show what percentage of target each quarter achieved. So we're kind of adding extra information to our visualization. So I just changed the visualization depends on and the nodes near coordinate line. I changed the formula to divide this row sales by this row target and then multiply that by 100 and round it to get a percentage. I also update the nodes near Coords to show a % sign instead of a K at the end. And then I can show how close we were to our target instead of showing the actual number in K. Let's also update the title and the style to make it clear that these are percentages. First, I'll change the title. I add some blue text there. I add a style of nodes near Coords and make it background white again, and then make the text blue so that we can see that clearly that that's reflecting the % of target. Now let's compare 2024 to 2023 sales by adding a second set of bars. So I'm going to add here another add plot command with the exact same thing, except for the data file is sales 2023. When I compile that, now we have our two bars. I'm using olive as the fill color to distinguish it from the red 2024 bars. Now the bar labels work okay here because we are reading from two different files that have the same column names. So when I do this visualization depends on, and I add sales and target, that works because these two different files have the same column names. If we didn't have that, we could actually put that into the add plot command itself and specify the specific column names for those things that we needed. I hope that makes sense. Now we need a legend so viewers know which bars are which, and we'll put that in the upper left corner by specifying a few more options here. And I cover legends in another episode, which I'll link to in the comments. The bars here are really close together, And as a result, this 86%, you can see the white is overlapping the bar a bit. So let's adjust that by changing a few things. So here for ybar, I'm going to actually replace that with ybar equals 5pt. And that is saying how much space to put between subsequent ybars. When I compile that, we have a little more space between each group. Even with that extra space, the white background on the numbers is still overlapping neighboring bars a bit. So let's set the inner except to 0. And so I'll go down here to the nodes near Coords style, and then I'll paste inner except equals 0pt. And now that just shrinks a little bit the extra white space on either side of those percentages. Finally, let's make the plot wider to give more space. So I'm going to override the width that I set at the top and just set it to be 12 centimeters. I'll zoom out a little bit so we can see this better. I hope you enjoyed today's episode on adding numbers to bar plots using pgfplots. We covered the nodes near Coords option, how to style the numbers, how to use visualization depend on to show computed values like rounded numbers or percentages or something totally different, and how to handle multiple data series. I include a link to the overlay document I created today in the show notes. If you found this helpful or interesting, please click like or subscribe. If you have TXIE or pgfplots questions, please post them in the comments. If you want to learn more, please check out the other videos. I also have a book, Unlocking LaTeX Graphics, available for purchase at major book retailers. Thanks for watching.